Welcome to This Explainer. Right now, we're jumping straight back into early 20th century colonial India. It's this incredibly volatile time where deeply entrenched social hierarchies are about to slam head-on into a completely unstoppable new technology, the moving picture. Today, we're tracing the evolution of the public sphere in relation to cinema. We're going to see how the arrival of film just totally upended how people gathered and communicated, sparking this massive clash between the old elite gatekeepers and a brand new, completely unruly mass audience.
To kick things off, listen to this. Back in 1915, right after screening a war film, the Manchester Guardian had this massive realization. They wrote, "The moving picture is the new universal language." I mean, really think about the sheer weight of that for a second. For literally the first time in human history, you could tell a story, convey an emotion, or spread an ideology across the globe, and nobody needed to know how to read or even speak a specific language to get it. It was this thrilling and honestly terrifying realization of power.
But that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? If cinema is this new universal language, well, who exactly gets to write the dictionary? Who gets to decide what that language says? The whole story we're unpacking today revolves around this fierce, messy battle to control this wild new medium. It was basically a turf war for the minds, morals, and loyalties of millions.
Section 1. The Lettered City, a polite and print-bound world.
Now, to truly appreciate the shock of cinema, we kind of need to understand the world it disrupted. Before film came along, the public sphere in India, the spaces where people debated politics or culture, was essentially this ultra-exclusive club known as the Lettered City. It was a bourgeois, print-literate space entirely dominated by English-educated and vernacular elites. Basically, if you wanted to have a voice in the nation's public discourse, you absolutely had to know how to read and write. It was a space of rational, polite, heavily restricted communication, bound strictly to books and newspapers. If you were part of the illiterate masses, the velvet rope was closed.
Section 2. Cinema breaches the walls. The arrival of the silver screen.
The arrival of the silver screen, well, it wasn't just a fun new form of entertainment. It was a socially disruptive force that crashed right through the walls of polite society. You see, the elites cherished what we'd call the Habermasian ideal of the public sphere, a very quiet, rational, deliberative space that demanded a high level of education. But cinema introduced the cinematic bazaar. It was loud, it was emotional, visually overwhelming, and driven purely by the chaotic desires of consumers. Just imagine the sensory overload of a packed, dark theater. It completely bypassed the need for literacy and just drowned out the quiet exclusivity of the print world with this thrilling, incredibly inclusive new energy.
And how did this massive shift in the public sphere happen so quickly? Simple. Admission cost just a few coins. All of a sudden, anyone with a little bit of spare change in their pocket, no matter their class, their caste, or whether they could read a single word, could buy a ticket to the gallery seats. They were suddenly participating in this brand new mass public sphere. The elite monopoly on culture was, quite literally overnight, totally shattered.
Section 3. The colonial empire panics. Cracks in the facade.
Now, the British colonial state relied heavily on maintaining this strict aura of authority and racial superiority, so, naturally, they were terrified. This whole panic really kicked into high gear with a boxing match. In 1910, the Johnson-Jeffries fight was captured on film, showing Jack Johnson, a black man, defeating James J. Jeffries, a white man. For the British in India, this footage circulating was an absolute disaster. It gave undeniable visual proof to the colonized population that white men were not invincible. This uncontrollable flow of rebellious visual info directly forced the government's hand, leading to the Cinematograph Bill in 1917, and then the really strict censorship of the Cinematograph Act in 1918.
So what exactly was keeping the British up at night? Aside from the subversion of racial hierarchies we saw with the boxing film, there was this intense gendered anxiety. Hollywood films were flooding into India, exposing what officials called the white zenana, basically the private and sometimes scandalous inner lives of white Western women. The British felt their carefully curated image of moral superiority was just being trashed by American movies. Plus, they were terrified that films showing struggles in other parts of the world would spark a shared, transnational solidarity among the colonized. And honestly, on a purely practical level, the cinema hall itself was this dark, crowded space that completely broke down the socially enforced segregation between the rulers and the ruled.
Section 4. The elite Indian anxiety. Fear of the mass public. Here is where the story gets really fascinating, because it wasn't just the British Empire freaking out. The educated Indian elites, the gatekeepers of that lettered city we talked about earlier, they shared this profound dread of the new mass audience.
Just listen to this quote from a witness testifying before the Indian Cinematograph Committee in the 1920s. The cinema unduly emphasizes the lower side of life and the cruder passions of mankind. You can practically hear the snobbery, right? These educated classes looked at the rowdy, cheering audiences packing the gallery seats with utter disdain. They didn't see fellow citizens participating in a new public sphere. They saw a volatile, unrefined mob that just lacked the cultural capital to appreciate good art.
The rhetoric from these Indian elites was actually pretty extreme, often leaning hard on medical vocabulary. They literally treated cinema like a contagion. It was seen as this dirty disease infecting the masses with bad taste, inappropriate Western modernity, and severe moral decay. They were genuinely terrified that this uneducated public was just soaking up all the wrong lessons from these chaotic, sensational films.
Now, let's make this a bit more relatable. Have you ever judged someone for the reality TV they watch? Or maybe some wild viral videos they consume? That exact feeling of media snobbery, thinking someone else's entertainment is lowbrow or brain-rotting, that is exactly what the lettered elite of 1920s India were feeling. They were projecting their own deep-seated class anxieties right onto the silver screen because they were terrified of a public they couldn't control anymore.
Section 5. Citizens versus Consumers, the box office ballot.
As we move into the 1920s and 30s, this huge paradox emerges in how different groups tried to harness this new cinematic public sphere. Two completely different visions for the Indian audience clashed. On one side, you had the nationalist elites dreaming of the spectator as citizen. They wanted to use the screen like a giant chalkboard to morally educate the masses, teaching them patriotism, civic duty, and pristine traditional values. But the reality on the ground? That was the spectator as consumer. The people in the gallery weren't paying their hard-earned coins to sit through a lecture. No way! They wanted thrills, they wanted emotion, and they wanted pure, unadulterated entertainment. And the numbers, well, they absolutely prove who won that fight. Between 1927 and 1928, a whopping 85% of feature films released in India were foreign films, mostly coming straight out of Hollywood. The masses were overwhelmingly flexing their power as consumers. They were casting their votes at the box office for global spectacles, action, and romance, completely ignoring the elites who were sitting there wringing their hands over the need for purely educational content.
So, what's the lasting legacy of this incredible collision? Ultimately, the cinematic bazaar successfully bypassed that exclusive print-bound lettered city for good. It created this massive, messy, but incredibly inclusive public sphere. The gallery audience, just everyday people, managed to defy both the strict censorship of the British Empire and the condescending tastes of their own Indian elites. In doing so, they established the chaotic, highly democratic, consumer-driven media landscape that we are still living in today.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to wrap up on. This colonial-era clash, it's not just ancient history. It is literally the blueprint for our modern media world. Today, we elect our politicians at the ballot box, but we elect our culture at the box office. And through our clicks, our views, our streams. So when you look at the media you choose to engage with today, ask yourself, are you acting as a citizen seeking to be informed, or are you just a consumer looking for a thrill? The struggle to define the universal language of the screen is still happening right now. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you see.